Today I will explain the Sumerian civilization. Let's start. Before cities had names, before kings carved their power into stone, before history learned how to remember itself, there was land caught between two rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates did not flow gently. They flooded without warning, tearing through fields, swallowing homes, then retreating as if nothing had happened. To later people, this land would be called Mesopotamia. To the first people who truly settled here, it was simply the place where survival was a daily gamble. Imagine a wide, flat plain under an endless sky. The sun rises harsh and white. The soil is dry and cracked for most of the year, then suddenly turns to thick mud when the rivers overflow. There are no forests for timber, no mountains rich with stone, no natural walls for protection. And yet, thousands of years ago, people chose to stay. They dug canals with their bare hands. They learned to read the moods of the rivers. They built homes from mud and reeds. Slowly, painfully, they turned chaos into order. These people were the Sumerians. We do not know where they came from. Their language does not match any other known tongue. It appears suddenly, like a voice rising out of silence. By around 3500 BCE, they were already building cities, farming the land, trading with distant regions, and organizing society in ways the world had never seen before. While other humans still lived in scattered villages, the Sumerians were inventing civilization itself. At the heart of their world were the cities: Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish. Each city rose from the mud like a miracle, surrounded by walls, filled with narrow streets, workshops, markets, and temples. These were not just places to live. They were living beings in the minds of the Sumerians, each protected by its own god, each competing with the others for power, land, and divine favor. Uruk was the first great city. At its height, it may have held 50,000 people, an unimaginable number for the ancient world. From a distance, the city shimmered under the sun, its mud brick buildings blending into the earth, its great temple complex towering above everything else. This temple was the heart of Uruk, a place where humans and gods were believed to meet. The Sumerians believed the gods owned everything: the land, the rivers, the crops, even the cities themselves. Humans were created to work for the gods, to feed them through offerings, to honor them through rituals, and to maintain order in a dangerous world. Life was fragile, and the gods were powerful, unpredictable, and deeply involved in human affairs. At the center of each city stood a ziggurat. It was not a pyramid, but a massive stepped tower made of sun-dried brick. From the ground, it rose in stages, each level higher than the last, until it reached a shrine at the top. This was the home of the city's god on earth. Only priests could enter the highest levels, climbing toward the sky as incense drifted upward and prayers echoed in the heat. Below, everyday life unfolded. Farmers worked the fields outside the city walls, planting barley and wheat, guiding river water through canals that stretched for miles. Shepherds watched over sheep and goats. Inside the city, craftsmen shaped clay into pots, tools, and tablets. Merchants traded grain for wood, stone, copper, and precious goods brought from distant lands like Anatolia and the Indus Valley. But this growing complexity brought new problems. How do you track grain stored in temples? How do you record debts, trade, ownership, and labor? Spoken words were not enough. Memory failed. Disputes grew. And so, out of necessity, the Sumerians did something extraordinary. They invented writing. At first, it was simple. Small pictures scratched into wet clay, each symbol representing an object. A sheep, a jar of oil, a measure of grain. Over time, these pictures became abstract shapes, pressed into clay with a reed stylus. These wedge-shaped marks would later be called cuneiform. With them, humans could record information, preserve knowledge, and speak across time. The first writers were not poets or philosophers. They were accountants. Writing was a tool of administration, power, and control. Temples and palaces used it to manage resources and labor. To write was to hold authority. Scribes trained for years, memorizing hundreds of symbols, learning to shape clay tablets with precision. Literacy was rare, and those who possessed it stood close to power. As cities grew richer, they grew more competitive. Water rights, fertile land, and trade routes became sources of conflict. City-states clashed, their armies meeting on open plains, their leaders seeking favor from the gods before battle. There was no united Sumer. There were only rivals, bound together by culture, but divided by ambition. To rule these cities, leaders emerged who were more than priests, but not yet kings in the later sense. They were called Ensi or Lugal, titles that blended religious duty with political authority. A ruler was seen as chosen by the gods, responsible for justice, prosperity, and protection. If floods came or crops failed, it was not just a natural disaster. It was a sign of divine anger. Despite their achievements, life was hard. Disease was common. Death came early. The afterlife, in Sumerian belief, was bleak. There was no paradise waiting beyond death. The underworld was a dark, dusty place where spirits existed as shadows, sustained by offerings from the living. This made life on earth precious, urgent, and deeply meaningful. The Sumerians sang songs, told stories, and passed down myths that explained their world. They spoke of creation, of gods who shaped humanity from clay, of heroes who challenged fate. These stories were first spoken aloud, then written down, pressed into clay, fired by time itself. As the sun set over the flat horizon, smoke rising from hearths, drums echoing from temple courtyards, the Sumerians could not know what they had started. They were simply trying to survive between between two dangerous rivers. Yet, in doing so, they laid the foundations of law, writing, religion, and urban life. And soon, one story in particular would rise above all others. A story of a king, a hero, a man who feared death and searched for meaning. His name would echo across thousands of years. In the next part, we step into the world of kings, gods, and the first great epic ever told. As Sumer's myths and rulers begin to shape the soul of civilization itself, in the heart of Uruk, where dust clung to skin and the air shimmered with heat, stories were told long before they were written. Elders spoke them at dusk. Priests whispered them in temples. Parents passed them to children beside flickering oil lamps. These stories were not entertainment. They were explanations. They told the Sumerians who they were, why the world was cruel, and how the gods watched every human step. Above all stories stood the tale of a king. His name was Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a ruler of unmatched strength who built the mighty walls of Uruk. The walls were real, massive, thick, stretching around the city like a stone promise of safety. To the Sumerians, walls meant survival. They kept out enemies, wild animals, and the chaos of the outside world. Gilgamesh was remembered as the builder of these walls, the protector of his people, and also their tormentor. Because Gilgamesh was powerful, and power without balance becomes cruelty. The stories say he ruled harshly. He took what he wanted. He exhausted his people with endless labor. He reminded them every day that he was closer to the gods than they would ever be. And so the people of Uruk cried out to the heavens. They begged the gods to humble their king. The gods listened. From clay, just as humans were first shaped, they created Enkidu. He was wild, covered in hair, living among animals, drinking from rivers, running free across the plains. Enkidu was not civilized. He did not know walls, laws, or temples. He was nature itself, sent to confront a king who had forgotten his limits. When Enkidu finally met Gilgamesh, the earth shook beneath them. They fought like storms colliding. Brick walls cracked. Dust filled the air. And then something unexpected happened. Neither could defeat the other. Strength met strength. Pride met pride. And in that moment, they recognized themselves. They became brothers. This friendship changed everything. Gilgamesh softened. Enkidu learned the ways of the city. Together they sought glory, not through cruelty, but through deeds that would outlast death. They traveled to distant lands, fought monsters placed by the gods, and carved their names into memory itself. But the gods are never silent observers. The gods punished Enkidu for defying divine order. He fell sick. His strength faded. His breath grew shallow. Gilgamesh watched helplessly as his brother died. For the first time, the mighty king felt fear. Not of enemies, not of gods, but of death. This fear shattered him. Gilgamesh wandered the world, wearing animal skins, his once polished appearance broken by grief. He searched for a way to escape death, to find immortality, to avoid the same fate that claimed Enkidu. His journey took him beyond cities, beyond known lands, into places where humans were not meant to go. At the end of his journey, he met Utnapishtim, a man who had survived a great flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity. Utnapishtim had been granted eternal life, not because he sought it, but because he obeyed the gods. Gilgamesh begged for the secret. He demanded answers. What he received was not what he wanted. Immortality was not meant for humans. Life was short by design. Meaning came not from living forever, but from what one built, protected, and left behind. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk empty-handed, but wiser. He looked upon the walls he had built and understood. This was his legacy. Not eternal life, but memory. This story, carved into clay tablets, is the oldest epic known to humanity. It reveals something essential about the Sumerians. They were not naive dreamers. They understood suffering, loss, and the limits of human power. Their gods were not kind. Their world was fragile. And yet, they searched for meaning anyway. While myth shaped the soul of Sumer, daily life continued under the watchful eyes of the gods. Religion was not separate from existence. It was existence. Every city belonged to a god. Uruk belonged to Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war. She was fierce, unpredictable, and deeply human in her emotions. Other gods ruled the sky, the sun, the underworld, and the waters. Each controlled a piece of reality. Temples were not quiet places. They were busy centers of economic and spiritual life. Priests managed fields, stored grain, employed workers, and conducted rituals meant to keep the gods satisfied. Offerings of food, drink, music, and prayer filled the temples daily. If the gods were pleased, the city would prosper. If not, disaster followed. The Sumerians read meaning in everything. A malformed birth, a strange dream, an unusual movement of stars, all were signs. Diviners studied animal livers, cracks in bones, and patterns in smoke to interpret the will of the gods. The future was uncertain, but it was never random. And still, despite prayers and rituals, suffering remained. Floods destroyed crops. Drought starved cities. Enemies attacked without warning. This tension between human effort and divine control shaped Sumerian thinking. Humans could plan, build, and organize, but they could never fully escape fate. As centuries passed, the cities grew older and heavier with tradition. Writing evolved beyond accounting into hymns, myths, laws, and wisdom texts. Knowledge was no longer just practical. It became philosophical. The Sumerians asked questions that still haunt humanity. Why do the good suffer? Why do the gods remain distant? what makes a life meaningful. But as ideas deepened, power struggles intensified. Cities began to rise and fall more quickly. Strong rulers conquered neighbors. Alliances shattered. The rivers continued to flood, indifferent to human ambition. And from the north and east, new peoples watched Sumer closely, learning its ways, waiting for their moment. The world the Sumerians built was brilliant, but fragile. In the next part, we will step deeper into the machinery of Sumerian society itself, into laws, social classes, labor, and justice, and see how the first civilization tried to impose order on a world that refused to be tamed. As the sun rose over the flat plains of southern Mesopotamia, life in a Sumerian city began not with freedom, but with duty. Every person had a place. Every place had an expectation. Civilization, as the Sumerians understood it, was not comfort. It was structure. Without structure, they believed, the world would slide back into chaos, and the gods would turn away. The city was a carefully balanced machine. At the top stood the gods, unseen yet ever present. Beneath them were the rulers, chosen by divine will. Then came priests, scribes, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, laborers, and at the very bottom, slaves. This hierarchy was not questioned. It was as natural as the rising of the sun or the flooding of the rivers. The ruler, whether called Ensi or Lugal, was more than a political leader. He was the bridge between heaven and earth. His authority came from the gods, and his primary duty was to maintain order, justice, and prosperity. When he led armies, it was in the name of the city's god. When he built temples or canals, it was an act of devotion. A successful ruler proved divine favor. A failing one risked rebellion, invasion, or both. Temples dominated city life. They were not just religious centers, but economic engines. Vast fields belonged to the gods and were managed by priests. Grain, wool, oil, and livestock flowed into temple storehouses. From there, resources were distributed to workers, craftsmen, and officials. In many ways, the temple functioned like the first centralized institution, controlling production and labor on a massive scale. Scribes were essential to this system. Trained from a young age, they attended special schools where discipline was strict and mistakes were punished. They learned to shape clay tablets, memorize hundreds of cuneiform signs, and write with precision. A scribe could record a trade agreement, a legal dispute, a hymn to a god, or a royal decree. Because writing meant control, scribes held quiet but immense power. Most people, however, lived far from this world of administration. Farmers rose before dawn, working fields outside the city walls. They planted barley, the backbone of the Sumerian diet. They tended canals, repaired embankments, and prayed that the floods would come at the right time, not too early, not too late. A failed harvest meant hunger. repeated failure meant death. Craftsmen filled the city streets with sound and motion. Potters shaped clay on spinning wheels. Weavers worked looms, turning wool into fine cloth. Metalworkers hammered copper and bronze into tools and weapons. Each craft was specialized, passed down through families, refined over generations. This division of labor was new to the world, and it made Sumerian cities productive and wealthy. Trade connected Sumer to distant lands. Because their homeland lacked wood, stone, and metal, merchants traveled far to obtain them. Donkeys carried goods along dusty roads. Boats floated along rivers and coastlines. In return, Sumer exported grain, textiles, and crafted goods. These exchanges spread Sumerian ideas, writing, and culture far beyond their cities. Yet with wealth came inequality. Slavery existed in Sumer, though it was not always permanent. Some slaves were prisoners of war. Others were debtors who had lost everything. A person could sell themselves or their children into slavery to survive famine. Slaves worked in households, fields, and temples. While some could earn freedom, their lives were defined by dependency and vulnerability. To manage such a complex society, rules were necessary. Order had to be enforced, disputes settled, and wrongs punished. This led to one of Sumer's most important contributions to history: law. Long before famous law codes were carved in stone, Sumerian cities recorded laws on clay tablets. These laws were practical, not philosophical. They dealt with theft, assault, marriage, inheritance, labor, and property. Punishments were often fines rather than physical harm, reflecting a system concerned with restoring balance rather than revenge. Justice, however, was not equal. Social class mattered. The penalty for harming a noble was different from harming a commoner or a slave. Law reflected society, and society was deeply stratified. Even so, the idea that behavior could be judged by written rules rather than pure power was revolutionary. Women in Sumer lived lives of both restriction and opportunity. Most were expected to manage households, raise children, and support family labor. Marriages were arranged, often involving contracts and dowries. Yet women could own property, run businesses, serve as priestesses, and even act as scribes. Inanna herself was one of the most powerful gods, reflecting the complex role of women in Sumerian thought. Children learned their place early. Boys trained in their father's trade or entered scribal schools if their families could afford it. Girls learned household skills and preparation for marriage. Discipline was strict. Education was demanding. Life was not centered on childhood innocence, but on early responsibility. Religion shaped every decision. Before major actions, people consulted omens. Dreams were believed to carry messages from the gods. Illness was often seen as divine punishment or spiritual imbalance. Healers used herbs, prayers, and rituals together. There was no clear line between medicine and magic. Despite all their efforts to create order, fear remained a constant companion. The rivers could destroy in days what took years to build. Enemies could appear without warning. The gods could turn hostile without explanation. This tension pushed the Sumerians to document, organize, and control every aspect of life they could reach. But no system remains stable forever. As generations passed, rival cities grew more aggressive. Kings sought expansion rather than balance. Armies became larger. Wars became more frequent. And in the north, a new power was rising, learning from Sumer, adopting its writing, its gods, and its laws. The foundations of civilization were set, but the world was changing. War did not arrive suddenly in Sumer. It had always been there, simmering beneath the surface, carried by old grudges, disputed borders, and the endless hunger for fertile land. The rivers that gave life also drew lines of conflict. As cities grew stronger, their leaders began to look beyond their walls, imagining not just survival, but dominance. In the early days, Sumerian cities fought like rivals who shared the same blood. Their weapons were simple, but deadly. Spears tipped with copper, leather shields, helmets made of hammered metal. Soldiers marched in tight formations, shoulder to shoulder, advancing across open plains under burning sun. Battles were brutal, short, and personal. Victory meant land, water, and honor. Defeat meant loss, humiliation, and sometimes annihilation. One city in particular rose through force and ambition. Lagash. Lagash did not become powerful through trade or religion alone. It became powerful through war. Its rulers claimed divine backing and pushed their armies outward, clashing repeatedly with the neighboring city of Umma. Their conflict centered on a fertile strip of land, precious and limited, worth fighting over generation after generation. The struggle between Lagash and Umma is one of the earliest recorded wars in human history. It was not remembered through legend alone, but through carved stone. The steel of the vultures tells the story in chilling detail. On one side, soldiers of Lagash march in organized ranks, trampling enemies beneath their feet. On the other, vultures feast on the bodies of the defeated. This was not art for beauty. It was propaganda. A message carved in stone. This is what happens to those who defy us. The ruler behind this display was Enatum of Lagash. He claimed the god Ningirsu himself guided his campaigns. In inscriptions, Enatum described how divine forces crushed his enemies, how justice was restored through violence. To modern eyes, it seems ruthless. To the Sumerians, it was order enforced. Yet even as some cities conquered others, unity remained impossible. Each city believed its god was supreme. To submit to another city was to submit to another god. This religious division made lasting peace fragile and rare. While southern Sumer tore itself apart, a new presence loomed to the north. The Akkadians. Unlike the Sumerians, they spoke a Semitic language. They had lived alongside Sumer for generations, trading, learning, adapting. They adopted Sumerian writing, worshipped Sumerian gods, and served in Sumerian cities. But they were watching and waiting. Then came a man who would change everything. His name was Sargon. Sargon's story begins in secrecy and survival. According to legend, he was born in obscurity, set adrift in a basket on a river, saved by a gardener. Whether true or not, the story mattered. It painted Sargon as a chosen figure, raised from nothing by the will of the gods. When he seized power, he did so not as a city ruler, but as something new. Sargon conquered. One by one, Sumerian cities fell. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish. Their walls were breached, their kings defeated, their gods carried away as symbols of submission. For the first time in history, the cities of Mesopotamia were united under a single ruler. This was not a loose alliance. It was an empire. Sargon ruled from the city of Akkad, whose exact location remains lost to time. From there, he controlled territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Roads were secured. Trade routes expanded. Governors were appointed to oversee conquered cities. Sumerian writing became the administrative language of empire. The Sumerians were defeated, but not erased. Their culture proved stronger than their armies. Sargon understood this. Instead of destroying Sumerian traditions, he absorbed them. He honored Sumerian gods. He employed Sumerian scribes. He preserved Sumerian laws. The Akkadian Empire spoke with a Sumerian voice, even as it ruled with Akkadian power. For ordinary people, life changed slowly. Taxes increased. Soldiers passed through cities. New officials enforced imperial authority. Resistance flared, and rebellions were crushed. The idea of local independence faded, replaced by obedience to a distant king. After Sargon, his sons and grandsons inherited a fragile empire. Maintaining control over such vast lands required constant force. Armies marched endlessly. Rebellions broke out repeatedly. The gods, once again, were blamed for success or failure. Then came disaster. Drought struck the land. Crops failed. Famine spread. The Gutians, mountain tribes from the east, invaded weakened cities. The Akkadian Empire collapsed. Fragmenting under pressure, it could no longer withstand. In the ruins left behind, Sumerian cities breathed again. This period, known later as the Sumerian Renaissance, saw rulers reclaim old traditions and restore temples. The city of Ur rose to prominence, led by kings who presented themselves as guardians of ancient order. Writing flourished. Art returned to classical forms. For a moment, it seemed as though Sumer had survived the storm. But the world had changed. Empires had been born. Conquest had proven possible. Power was no longer confined to a single city and its god. And the lessons learned from Sumer would not be forgotten. The city of rose again from the dust, with a confidence shaped by memory and loss. Its streets were older now, its temples rebuilt with care, its people aware that greatness could vanish as quickly as it appeared. This was no longer the youthful Sumer of first cities and bold experiments. This was a civilization looking back at itself, determined to preserve what remained. At the center of this revival stood a powerful dynasty. Modern historians call it the third dynasty of but to the people who lived it, this was simply the return of order. After decades of chaos following the fall of the Akkadian Empire, the kings of promised stability, justice, and favor from the gods. The greatest of these kings was Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu did not rule as a conqueror first. He ruled as a builder. Under his command, canals were repaired, roads cleared, temples restored. The great ziggurat of rose once more, its massive steps climbing toward the sky, visible for miles across the plain. It was not just a monument to a god, but a declaration that Sumer still lived. Ur-Nammu understood that power without legitimacy would fail. And legitimacy in Sumer came from law. He ordered the creation of one of the world's earliest known law codes, written in clear language, carved into tablets. These laws were meant to be seen, remembered, and enforced. They addressed murder, theft, marriage, injury, and labor. Unlike later codes, Ur-Nammu's laws often focused on fines rather than physical punishment. Justice was meant to restore balance, not simply satisfy anger. The existence of such laws mattered as much as their content. They told the people that the world was not ruled by chaos alone, that right and wrong were defined, that even the powerful were bound, at least in theory, by written rules. This belief held society together. Administration became more advanced than ever before. Scribes recorded everything: grain rations, work assignments, temple offerings, tax collection. The state monitored labor with astonishing detail. Workers were organized, scheduled, and paid in measured rations. The system was efficient, but demanding. Life under Ur's kings was stable, but controlled. Art and literature flourished during this period. Sculptures became more refined, with careful attention to detail and expression. Hymns to the gods were written with poetic depth. Kings commissioned songs praising their devotion and wisdom. These were not acts of vanity alone. They were attempts to shape memory, to ensure that future generations would remember this age as one of harmony. Religion remained central. The gods were still feared, still unpredictable. But there was a stronger sense of structure now. Rituals followed strict calendars. Festivals marked the seasons. Priests performed elaborate ceremonies meant to maintain cosmic balance. The belief was simple. If humans did their part, the gods might restrain their anger. Despite this order, cracks were forming. The empire of Ur stretched across much of southern Mesopotamia. Maintaining control required constant administration and military readiness. Governors ruled distant cities, sending taxes and loyalty back to Ur. Over time, resentment grew. Local identities, never fully erased, began to reassert themselves. Beyond the borders, threats gathered. To the west, Amorite tribes moved slowly into Mesopotamia, settling, trading, and sometimes raiding. To the east, Elamite forces watched carefully, waiting for weakness. Climate conditions worsened. Rain patterns shifted. Harvests became less reliable. The old fear returned. The gods, once again, seemed restless. In the final years of the dynasty, signs of decline multiplied. Records show emergency grain distributions. Fortifications were strengthened. Prayers became more urgent. Yet preparation could not stop what was coming. The Elamites attacked with force. Cities fell. Ur was besieged. Its walls, once symbols of endurance, could not hold forever. When Ur finally collapsed, it was not just a military defeat. It was a spiritual shock. The city of the moon god, the guardian of ancient tradition, lay broken. Laments were written in response. These laments are among the most haunting texts left by the Sumerians. They describe cities abandoned by their gods, temples left in silence, people scattered like dust before the wind. The writers did not blame kings or armies alone. They believed the gods had turned away, choosing destruction for reasons humans could not understand. And with the fall of Ur, something else faded. The Sumerian language, once the voice of civilization, slowly retreated. Akkadian became dominant in daily life and administration. Sumerian survived in temples and schools, preserved like a sacred relic, studied but no longer spoken by the people. The Sumerians did not vanish overnight. Their ideas lived on through others. Their gods were renamed, their stories retold, their laws adapted. But the age of Sumer as a living civilization was ending. Still, endings are never complete. Long after the walls of Ur were broken and its streets fell quiet, Sumer did not truly disappear. It lingered like a ghost, woven into the bones of Mesopotamia. The people were gone, their language fading from everyday speech, but their ideas refused to die. Civilization, once awakened, does not easily fall back asleep. The cities that rose after Sumer were built on Sumerian foundations, sometimes literally. New rulers walked streets paved by earlier hands. Temples were rebuilt on ancient platforms. Old canals were cleared and reused. The land remembered Sumer, even when people began to forget its name. Akkadian had become the spoken language of power, but Sumerian lived on as a sacred tongue. It became the language of temples, rituals, and learning. To write in Sumerian was to reach back into the age of origins. Scribes continued to study it for centuries, copying ancient hymns, myths, and laws with reverence. In schools, students memorized Sumerian texts word by word, even when they no longer fully understood the spoken language. It was history preserved by discipline. The gods of Sumer survived as well. Inanna became Ishtar. Enlil remained the lord of wind and authority. Udu became Shamus, god of justice and the sun. Names shifted, accents changed, but the divine personalities endured. Their temples still stood. Their festivals were still celebrated. The fears and hopes they embodied were still deeply human. New kingdoms rose in this inherited world. Isin, Larsa, Babylon, each claimed legitimacy by honoring ancient tradition. Kings called themselves restorers, not innovators. They rebuilt old temples, quoted old laws, and traced their authority back to the time when gods first walked among men. None understood this better than Babylon. At first, Babylon was small and unremarkable. It sat quietly among older, more powerful cities. But history does not always favor the ancient. Sometimes it chooses the patient. When Babylon finally rose to prominence, it did so by mastering Sumer's legacy. Its greatest king, Hammurabi, ruled centuries after the fall of Ur. He is remembered today not just as a conqueror, but as a lawgiver. His famous law code, carved into stone, stands as one of history's most iconic legal texts. Yet much of it was not new. It echoed Sumerian legal traditions shaped long before his time. The idea that laws should be written, displayed, and enforced came directly from Sumer. The belief that a king ruled by divine authority, responsible for justice, also came from Sumer. Even Hammurabi's gods were inherited, reshaped versions of ancient Sumerian deities. Through Babylon, Sumer spoke again. Writing continued to evolve, but cuneiform remained the backbone of record-keeping for centuries. Contracts, letters, treaties, prayers, astronomical observations, medical texts, all pressed into clay using the same basic system invented thousands of years earlier. Civilizations rose and fell, but the wedge-shaped marks endured. Sumerian mathematics also lived on. The base 60 system they developed shaped how time itself is measured. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Circles divided into 360 degrees. Every glance at a clock is a quiet tribute to Sumer. Their astronomy survived as well. Sumerian priests once watched the skies searching for omens. Later scholars turned those observations into structured knowledge. Planetary movements were recorded, eclipses predicted, the heavens became a map, and humanity learned to read it. Yet, perhaps Sumer's most powerful inheritance was not technical, but emotional. The Sumerians were the first to write about fear, grief, doubt, and the search for meaning. Their laments for fallen cities expressed a deep sense of loss. Their myths wrestled with mortality. Their heroes failed, suffered, and learned painful truths. This was not propaganda alone. It was reflection. The epic of Gilgamesh continued to be copied and expanded long after Sumer itself faded. Akkadian versions spread across Mesopotamia. Each generation found something familiar in Gilgamesh's struggle, his fear of death, his anger at the gods, his realization that meaning lies not in immortality, but in what one builds for others. As centuries passed, Sumer became legend. Later peoples spoke of a time when gods founded cities and taught humans how to live. Sumer was remembered as the first age, the beginning. Even when details blurred, the idea of origins remained powerful. To understand the present, people looked backward, not forward. But memory is fragile. Slowly, cuneiform fell out of use. Alphabetic scripts replaced it, easier to learn, quicker to write. Clay tablets were abandoned. Temples collapsed. The language of Sumer slipped into silence. By the first millennium BCE, no one spoke it anymore. Its voice was sealed in clay, buried beneath sand. For thousands of years, Sumer slept. Empires came and went above its ruins. Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans. Each ruled the land in turn, often unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Cities shifted. Rivers changed course. Names were lost. Then, in the modern age, the earth was disturbed. European explorers and archaeologists arrived in Mesopotamia, driven by curiosity and ambition. They dug into mounds that locals had long ignored. They uncovered walls, statues, and tablets covered in strange marks. At first, no one could read them. The past had written itself, but forgotten how to speak. The breakthrough came slowly. Scholars compared symbols. They matched names. They cracked the logic of cuneiform. And suddenly, the dead spoke. Kings announced their victories. Merchants listed their trades. Priests sang hymns. Mothers prayed for children. Entire cities cried out from the dust. Humanity heard its own earliest voice for the first time. The discovery of Sumer reshaped history. It pushed civilization further back than anyone had imagined. It revealed that writing, law, cities, and organized religion did not slowly drift into existence, but appeared together in a powerful burst of human creativity. It showed that modern life rests on ancient foundations. Yet this revelation also brought discomfort. The Sumerians were advanced, but not gentle. They were organized, but deeply unequal. They built civilization alongside suffering. Progress came with cost. This forced a difficult question. Was civilization a blessing, or simply a different kind of struggle? That question remains unanswered. Today, the land of Sumer lies within modern Iraq, scarred by conflict, politics, and time. Many ancient sites remain endangered. Some have been damaged or looted. Clay tablets, once sealed safely underground, are scattered across museums and private collections around the world. And still, Sumer endures. Every city is a descendant of Uruk. Every law owes something to those first codes. Every story that questions life and death walks the path Gilgamesh once traveled. The Sumerians may be gone, but they are not silent. They whisper from clocks, from books, from laws, from the very idea of civilization. To truly understand Sumer, we must step away from kings, wars, and monuments and move closer to the ground, into narrow streets where mud clung to sandals, into small homes where smoke drifted through reed roofs, into the quiet moments that never made it into royal inscriptions. Civilization is not built by rulers alone. It is built by ordinary lives, lived day after day, beneath an unforgiving sky. A Sumerian morning began early. As the first light spread across the plain, families stirred inside modest houses made of mud brick. These homes were practical, not beautiful. Thick walls kept out heat. Few windows protected against dust and thieves. Inside, rooms surrounded a central courtyard where cooking, washing, and work took place. Privacy was rare. Life was shared, always visible, always close. Food was simple but sustaining. Barley bread formed the core of every meal. It was dense, dark, and coarse, often eaten with onions, dates, lentils, or fish pulled from rivers and canals. Meat was rare for common people, saved for festivals or sacrifices. Beer, thick and cloudy, was safer than water and consumed daily by adults and children alike. Drinking straws were used to avoid swallowing sediment, a small but telling detail of daily adaptation. Clothing reflected both environment and status. Most people wore simple wool garments, wrapped or draped around the body. Colors were muted for the poor, richer dyes reserved for elites. Jewelry made of beads or shells added personal expression, even in hard lives. Cleanliness mattered. People bathed when possible, used oils and perfumes, and believed that physical care honored the gods. Work filled nearly every waking hour. Farmers labored outside the city, battling heat and exhaustion. They repaired canals damaged by floods, guided water through fields, and prayed that the gods would not send too much or too little. Irrigation was both salvation and threat. Mismanaged water could ruin soil through salt buildup, slowly killing fields that once fed thousands. Inside the city, craftsmen worked with intense focus. A potter's wheel spun endlessly. A weaver's hands moved in rhythm with the loom. A scribe hunched over clay tablets, pressing signs with careful precision. Each mistake mattered. A wrong symbol could mean lost grain, unpaid labor, or legal dispute. There was no erasing wet clay without consequence. Women's lives were complex and often misunderstood. While bound by social expectations, they were not invisible. Women brewed beer, wove cloth, managed households, raised children, and in many cases ran businesses. Some women owned taverns, traded goods, or acted as lenders. Priestesses held high status, especially those dedicated to powerful gods. Yet danger was always present. Laws concerning marriage, adultery, and inheritance favored men. Security depended on family, reputation, and the unpredictable will of fate. Children grew up quickly. Play existed, but survival demanded early responsibility. Boys helped fathers in fields or workshops. Girls assisted mothers at home. Education was harsh for those destined to become scribes. School tablets reveal complaints, beatings, exhaustion, and pride. Learning was painful, but knowledge was power. A trained scribe could rise above poverty, gaining access to administration and influence. Illness haunted every household. Without understanding germs or disease, people relied on a mix of medicine and magic. Healers used herbs, oils, and poultices, alongside incantations meant to drive out evil spirits. Sickness was often seen as divine punishment. Recovery required both treatment and forgiveness from the gods. Death, when it came, was swift and often unexplained. Grief was deeply personal, yet publicly expressed. Burials were simple. Bodies were placed beneath floors or in cemeteries outside city walls. Grave goods were modest: pottery, tools, small offerings. The afterlife promised little comfort. Souls entered a dark underworld, sustained only by offerings from the living. Forgetting the dead was the greatest tragedy. Fear shaped behavior. Fear of gods. Fear of hunger. Fear of invasion. Fear of forgetting one's duty. Omens were taken seriously. A strange dream, an unusual birth, an animal acting oddly, all were signs. People consulted diviners before major decisions. Even kings hesitated without divine approval. Uncertainty ruled the future. Yet joy existed. Festivals filled streets with music, laughter, and color. Drums echoed. Singers praised the gods. Offerings overflowed temples. For a moment, fear receded. Community mattered deeply. People relied on neighbors, family, and shared rituals to endure hardship. Survival was collective. Time itself felt different. The Sumerians lived close to natural cycles. Seasons dictated labor. The moon guided calendars. Stars marked divine messages. Life was repetitive, but not meaningless. Each action fit into a cosmic order, fragile yet purposeful. As generations passed, these daily rhythms continued even as rulers changed and empires rose and fell. A farmer in late Sumer lived much like 1 century earlier. This continuity was both strength and weakness. It preserved culture, but resisted change. When external pressures mounted, adaptation came slowly. Eventually, daily life shifted under new rulers. Akkadians, Amorites, Babylonians, Assyrians, all inherited Sumerian routines with slight variations. Houses remained similar. Food remained familiar. Work remained demanding. The shape of civilization held, even as names changed. And still, the original voice faded. Children no longer spoke Sumerian at home. Mothers sang lullabies in new languages. Prayers shifted in sound, if not meaning. The old words survived only in schools and temples, preserved by tradition, not living memory. This is how civilizations truly die, not through conquest alone, but through forgetting. Yet something remained unbroken. The human questions Sumer first recorded never disappeared. How do we live under forces we cannot control? How do we find meaning in short lives? How do we face death knowing the gods may not care? These questions traveled forward in time, carried by those who inherited Sumer's world. When Sumer faded from daily life, it did not vanish into darkness. Instead, it became something quieter, more subtle. It became memory. And memory, when carried by others, changes shape. Later civilizations did not simply preserve Sumer. They reinterpreted it, sometimes honoring it, sometimes bending it to serve new meanings. The Babylonians believed they lived in a world already shaped by ancient hands. Their cities stood where older cities once stood. Their gods had older faces beneath new names. Their rituals echoed ceremonies first performed thousands of years earlier. To them, Sumer was not a foreign past. It was an ancestral shadow, always present, rarely questioned. Scribes became the keepers of this shadow. In scribal schools, students copied ancient Sumerian texts again and again. They did not always understand every word, but accuracy mattered more than comprehension. To copy correctly was to show discipline. To preserve the old texts was to maintain cosmic order. These tablets included hymns, myths, proverbs, medical instructions, and laments written long before Babylon existed. Among these texts were lists of kings stretching back to the beginning of time, lists of cities, gods, professions, animals, stones, and stars. These lists were not boring to ancient minds. They were attempts to map reality. To name something was to understand it. To place it in order was to control chaos. The Sumerian king list was especially powerful. It described a time before the flood, when kings ruled for impossibly long lives, tens of thousands of years. Then came the flood, sent by the gods to reset the world. After it, kingship descended again, passed from city to city by divine will. To later readers, this list blurred myth and history. It did not separate legend from fact. It treated both as truth. This mattered deeply. By placing human rule within a divine timeline, Sumerian tradition gave later kings a tool. If kingship came from the gods in ancient times, then modern kings could claim the same authority. Power was not just political, it was cosmic. The Assyrians understood this well. They were fierce, disciplined, and militaristic. Their empire spread through fear and force. Yet they saw themselves not as destroyers of tradition, but as its rightful heirs. Assyrian kings filled their palaces with tablets copied from Sumerian and Babylonian originals. They built libraries to preserve ancient knowledge. Even as they burned cities, they saved texts. One Assyrian king in particular stands out. Ashurbanipal, ruler of a vast empire, ordered scribes to gather every important text they could find. From temples, schools, and private collections, tablets were brought to his capital. Myths, rituals, omens, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, all were preserved. Much of what we know about Sumer today survived because of this obsession. Ironically, Sumer was remembered most clearly by those who never spoke its language naturally. But memory can distort. Later civilizations sometimes misunderstood Sumerian beliefs. Gods were simplified. Myths were rewritten. Complex ideas were reduced to symbols. The subtle fear and humility that marked Sumerian religion slowly gave way to more confident, centralized systems of belief. The idea of the afterlife changed. Where Sumer saw a bleak underworld for all, later cultures imagined judgment, reward, and punishment. The gods became more moral, less chaotic. Humanity began to see itself not just as servants, but as beings with destiny. Still, traces remained. Flood myths persisted across cultures. Stories of divine anger, chosen survivors, and renewed worlds appeared again and again. These were not coincidences. They were echoes of Sumerian stories passed down through centuries of retelling. The epic of Gilgamesh left its fingerprints everywhere. Its themes appear in later literature. A hero who seeks meaning, a companion who dies, a journey beyond the known world, a confrontation with mortality. Even today, these patterns shape storytelling. They feel universal because they are ancient. Yet, while Sumer's ideas spread, the physical world of Sumer crumbled. Ziggurats collapsed into layered hills. Canals filled with silt. Cities became mounds, indistinguishable from natural rises in the land. Local people lived among these ruins without knowing their age. Legends grew around them. Some believed giants built them. Others believed they were cursed. Time buried Sumer completely. By the medieval period, its name was forgotten. Biblical stories referenced ancient cities, but the civilization behind them was unknown. History began, it seemed, with later empires. The beginning was lost. Then, curiosity returned. In the 19th century, travelers and scholars began digging into Mesopotamian soil. They uncovered bricks stamped with unfamiliar signs, statues with staring eyes, tablets covered in wedge-shaped marks, museums filled with artifacts no one could read. At first, scholars argued. Some believed the symbols were decorative. Others thought they were mystical. Slowly, patterns emerged. Names repeated. Kings appeared. Places aligned. When cuneiform was finally deciphered, it was as if the earth itself had begun to speak. What it said surprised everyone. History did not begin with Greece or Rome. It began earlier, much earlier, with farmers, scribes, priests, and kings who lived thousands of years before classical civilizations. The modern world was not original. It was inherited. This realization changed everything. Textbooks were rewritten. Timelines expanded. Humanity's story grew deeper and heavier. Civilization was no longer a recent achievement. It was an ancient experiment, tested again and again across millennia. But understanding Sumer also brought discomfort. These were not ideal people. They accepted slavery. They lived with inequality. They feared gods who could destroy them without warning. Progress came alongside suffering. Order existed alongside cruelty. This forced modern readers to ask difficult questions. Is civilization worth its cost? Is progress always improvement? Or is it simply change, repeating the same patterns under new names? Sumer does not answer these questions. It presents them. As archaeologists continue to dig, new tablets emerge. Each one adds detail, nuance, contradiction. Sumer becomes more human, less mythical. Its people argue, complain, pray, boast, and despair in voices that feel uncomfortably familiar. They are not strangers. They are us at the beginning. And yet, even with all this knowledge, something remains out of reach. A feeling, a moment, the exact point where humanity crossed from scattered survival into organized civilization. That moment is still hidden. To understand why Sumer happened, we must strip away kings, gods, and monuments, and look instead at pressure. Civilization was not born from comfort. It was born from necessity, from tension between survival and collapse. Sumer did not rise because humans suddenly became wiser. It rose because the land demanded something new. Southern Mesopotamia was both generous and cruel. The rivers brought life, but not gently. The Tigris and Euphrates flooded unpredictably, unlike the steady Nile. One year they nourished fields, the next they destroyed them. Rain was scarce. The soil, once watered, could grow astonishing amounts of grain, but only if humans controlled the water precisely. Left unmanaged, it turned salty and useless. This environment punished simplicity. Small farming villages could not survive long-term chaos. Population grew. Fields expanded. Irrigation systems became larger, more complex, and more fragile. Someone had to organize labor. Someone had to decide when canals were dug, when gates were opened, who received water first. That someone became authority. At first, authority was probably temporary. Elders, councils, priests who claimed divine insight. But as systems grew, authority hardened. Decisions became permanent. Roles became inherited. Power stopped rotating and began to settle. This is where Sumer truly began. Cities were not just collections of homes. They were machines built to manage risk. Walls protected stored grain. Temples coordinated labor. Writing tracked resources. Law reduced internal conflict. Every innovation answered a problem created by growth itself. Writing, especially, reveals this truth. The earliest Sumerian tablets are not poetry. They are lists, numbers, receipts, records of sheep, grain, beer, labor. Civilization did not begin with philosophy. It began with accounting, with the need to remember who owed what to whom. Memory became external. Once information left the human mind and entered clay, society changed forever. Knowledge could outlive individuals. Authority could persist beyond a single leader. Rules could be enforced consistently. Writing allowed control across time and space, but it also created distance. Those who could write gained power over those who could not. Scribes became gatekeepers of reality. What was written became truth. What was not recorded might as well not exist. This imbalance shaped everything that followed. The gods themselves were drawn into the system. Divine will was written, interpreted, archived. Priests spoke for the gods, but they also spoke for institutions. Religion and administration merged. Faith became organized. The Sumerian gods were not moral teachers. They were forces. Storms, floods, fertility, decay. Humans did not worship them out of love, but out of fear and negotiation. Offerings were insurance. Rituals were contracts. This reveals something uncomfortable. Sumerian religion was not about salvation. It was about survival. The afterlife offered no reward. Justice was uneven. The universe was not fair. And yet, people built cities anyway. They accepted suffering in exchange for stability. Civilization was a bargain, not a promise. As cities expanded, individuality shrank. Personal freedom was limited. Labor was assigned. Time was structured. Calendars dictated life. Festivals marked obedience to cosmic cycles. The city demanded everything, but it also gave something new in return: continuity. For the first time, humans could imagine a future beyond their own lifespan. A city might endure even if a person did not. Children would inherit fields, houses, professions, gods. Meaning extended forward. This may be civilization's deepest appeal, to be part of something that lasts. But endurance creates inertia. Sumerian society became rigid. Innovation slowed. Tradition hardened into law. When conditions changed, adaptation was difficult. Soil degradation worsened. Climate shifted. Enemies adapted faster. The system that once protected life became a trap. This pattern repeated again and again. Rise through organization. Prosper through stability. Decline through rigidity. Later civilizations inherited not just Sumer's tools, but its weaknesses. Empires expanded irrigation without understanding long-term soil damage. Bureaucracies grew heavy. Inequality deepened. Elites became detached from labor. When crises struck, collapse followed. Sumer was not a failure. It was a prototype. Its story warns as much as it inspires. The question then becomes unavoidable. Was civilization inevitable? Some scholars argue yes. Population growth and environmental pressure made complex organization unavoidable. Others argue Sumer was an accident of geography, a rare convergence of rivers, climate, and human choices. The truth may be more unsettling. Civilization may be both inevitable and flawed. A solution that creates new problems faster than it solves old ones. The Sumerians did not know this. They believed they were restoring order granted by the gods. They could not see the long arc of history. They lived inside the experiment. We live after it. And still, we repeat it. Cities grow. Bureaucracies expand. Writing becomes digital instead of clay. Laws multiply. Inequality persists. Fear remains. The names change, but the structure feels familiar. This is why Sumer matters, not because it was first, but because it was recognizable. When we read Sumerian complaints about corrupt officials, unfair labor, divine injustice, and existential fear, we are not reading aliens. We are reading ourselves, stripped of modern illusions. The first civilization did not create utopia. It created permanence, and permanence came with cost. As we stand at the far end of history's longest shadow, one final question remains. If Sumer was the beginning, what was it really the beginning of? Progress, control, alienation, cooperation, or an endless cycle of rise and fall? The story of Sumer is not just the story of cities, kings, and gods. It is the story of humanity learning to live together for the first time on a grand scale, of discovering that survival alone was not enough, that meaning as much as grain, water, and walls. To end our journey here is not to close a chapter, but to step closer to the essence of what the Sumerians left behind. A legacy that pulses quietly beneath every corner of human civilization. Imagine the first light over Uruk, the greatest city in early Sumer, centuries before our own time. The mud brick walls stretch endlessly, enclosing a city alive with sound, smell, and motion. Children dart along narrow streets, their feet dusty, their voices echoing between homes. Market stalls burst with barley, fish, dates, and small goods traded from distant towns. Bakers knead dough, potters shape clay, and weavers spin threads into rough but serviceable cloth. Smoke rises from hearths. The air carries the scent of fire, cooked food, and the earth itself, damp from irrigation canals that crisscross the surrounding plain. In the midst of this, priests chant to gods whose names may now seem strange: Enlil, Inanna, Udu, but whose presence shaped every breath the city took. These people were aware of fragility. They knew the rivers could save or destroy. They knew famine might sweep through if crops failed. They lived close to uncertainty, their daily lives defined by a constant negotiation with forces larger than themselves. Yet, they also found ways to create certainty, to make patterns out of chaos. Roads, canals, and temples provided stability. Laws written in clay-bound behavior. Rituals imposed rhythm on existence. Civilization, in its purest form, is this attempt to wrest order from uncertainty. And Sumer was the first to do it so deliberately, so completely. Life was not easy. Every day demanded effort. The sun beat down, and labor was relentless. Farmers dug and repaired canals, distributing water according to rules dictated by necessity and divine law. Artisans worked in long hours, shaping everything from tools to ceremonial objects. Scribes, few but immensely powerful, recorded every transaction, every laborer's work, every ounce of grain, every offering to the gods. These records, pressed into clay and baked to permanence, were the scaffolding of order. Without them, the complex society of Sumer would have collapsed under its own ambition. But beyond toil, there was meaning. The Sumerians were perhaps the first people to deeply wrestle with mortality and human fragility in writing. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though centuries old, captures this struggle with breathtaking clarity. The terror of death, the agony of loss, the drive to leave a mark that survives time itself. Kings sought to extend their memory through monuments and inscriptions. Priests sought favor from gods that might never smile. Ordinary people worked, prayed, celebrated, mourned, all within a fragile web of interdependence that made survival possible. Civilization, in this sense, was as much a psychological achievement as a practical one. Religion shaped the structure of daily life, but it also reflected human aspiration. The Sumerians believed gods controlled everything: floods, drought, fertility, even personal fortune. But in doing so, they also taught humanity how to cope with uncertainty. Sacrifice, ritual, and offerings were methods of influence, ways to impose partial control on a chaotic world. These practices created social cohesion. They justified authority. They instilled morality. They imposed patterns on experience, giving individuals a sense that life had shape, even if they could not control the forces around them. Yet, for all their brilliance, the Sumerians were not invincible. They faced natural disasters, soil salinity, conflicts with neighbors, and eventual invasions by outsiders such as the Akkadians, and later the Amorites and Elamites. Cities rose and fell, dynasties collapsed, wars decimated populations. The rivers, which had nurtured life, sometimes betrayed it. Famine, invasion, and mismanagement combined to remind the Sumerians that civilization, for all its power, remained fragile. Despite these struggles, Sumerian achievements endured. Writing persisted through Akkadian adaptation. Legal systems, administrative techniques, and religious practices informed all subsequent Mesopotamian cultures. Their base 60 mathematics still shapes how we measure time and angles. Their astronomical observations laid the groundwork for later science. Their myths shaped storytelling and moral exploration across millennia. In short, Sumer set patterns that continue to govern human life even today. What is remarkable is how much the ordinary Sumerians contributed to this legacy. While kings built temples and waged war, it was the farmers who kept the canals flowing, the artisans who crafted tools and vessels, and the scribes who painstakingly recorded information, who made civilization possible. Every innovation, from irrigation to writing, required collective effort. The individual's labor became part of a system larger than themselves, a network of cooperation and interdependence unprecedented in human history. Even their failures matter. The collapse of Sumerian cities reminds us that no system is perfect. Environmental degradation, political corruption, and inflexible administration all contributed to decline. These lessons echo across history. Centralized power can preserve society, but it can also magnify its vulnerabilities. Humanity learned again and again from the mistakes first made by Sumerians, and perhaps the most enduring lesson of all is existential. Sumer teaches us about mortality, not just of individuals, but of societies. Empires, cities, languages, and gods can vanish, yet ideas can survive. The clay tablets buried for millennia, the canals that silted over, the streets that eroded under the desert sun, they all whisper that human creativity persists even when civilizations fail. Sumer's imprint on history reminds us that the essence of civilization is not permanence of structures, but continuity of knowledge, culture, and thought. So when we look across the plains of southern Iraq today, where only ruins remain, it is easy to imagine the lives that once filled the space. The children running, the women grinding grain, the priests chanting to distant gods, the kings and scribes measuring every action in clay. That memory, almost tangible, bridges 4 millennia. Sumer was the first civilization to teach humanity how to organize life, to face mortality, to write down experience, and to imagine a world beyond survival. Their cities crumbled, their language faded, and their kings are long gone. But their influence is everywhere. In our laws, our cities, our writing, our measurement of time, and our stories. In the end, Sumer is more than history. It is a mirror. It reflects our earliest attempts to be human together, to find order in chaos, and to leave something behind for the generations that follow. Its lessons are subtle but powerful. Civilization is fragile. Progress carries cost. And yet, even amidst struggle and failure, humanity is capable of creating enduring beauty, structure, and meaning. As the sun sets over the ruins of Ur, painting the mud brick walls in amber light, one can almost hear the distant echoes of life, children laughing, merchants calling, priests singing, scribes scratching symbols into clay. It is a reminder that Sumerians were real people, with real hopes and fears, shaping the first civilization with their hands and minds. Their world ended, but in doing so, it gave rise to everything that followed. Their story is not over. It continues quietly beneath every city, every law, every tablet, every clock, every story. Civilization, in all its complexity, begins here with the Sumerians. And in that quiet persistence, their legacy lives, waiting for anyone willing to listen, even after the grand cities of Sumer had fallen silent, even after kings and priests were gone. The echoes of their lives continued to ripple outward, shaping human imagination and society for millennia. The clay tablets buried in the earth, the canals slowly reclaiming themselves by the desert wind, and the eroded ziggurats standing like broken monuments were not just remnants of a vanished people. They were reminders of the first human struggle to impose order on chaos, to craft meaning from uncertainty. To step into the world of Sumer is to step into a civilization alive with contrasts. Extreme brilliance and harsh struggle, divine fear and human resilience, monumental ambition and fragile mortality. In the streets of Ur and Uruk, life was tightly choreographed, yet unpredictable. Farmers labored under the relentless sun, repairing irrigation ditches that could either nourish their crops or flood them into ruin. Children played in the mud beside canals, their laughter mixing with the calls of merchants selling barley, fish, or clay pots. The scent of bread baking in hearths mingled with smoke from oil lamps and incense, offered to gods who might smile or strike down without warning. Religion was a framework, a lens through which every act, no matter how small, could be interpreted. The Sumerians saw divinity in the rising of the sun, the flooding of rivers, and even in disease and misfortune. Gods were not remote moral overseers. They were active participants in daily life. Enlil, lord of wind and earth, could bring prosperity or disaster. Inanna, goddess of love and war, demanded devotion in rituals that mixed ceremony, sacrifice, and theater. The common Sumerian approached these deities with awe and fear, offering gifts, labor, or song to maintain cosmic balance. Every transaction with a god was also a negotiation with fate itself. Writing, first born of necessity, became the vessel for both survival and imagination. The earliest cuneiform tablets, dense with numbers and lists, were practical tools for managing grain, labor, and trade. Yet gradually, they evolved to capture stories, myths, prayers, and knowledge. Sumerians were among the first humans to ask questions with words and leave the answers behind. The Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets, speaks of friendship, loss, mortality, and the desire to leave a lasting mark on the world. Its message resonates across time because it confronts the human condition in a way that is still relatable. The fear of death, the sorrow of losing a loved one, and the longing for immortality, not in body, but in memory. The social fabric of Sumer was intricate. Families, neighborhoods, guilds, and temple communities created networks of obligation and support, while kings and elites ruled. It was the daily actions of ordinary people, farmers, weavers, bakers, and scribes, that kept the city alive. Women, often overlooked in the historical record, held crucial responsibilities, managing households, producing textiles, brewing beer, trading goods, and sometimes serving as priestesses or merchants. Their labor was central to both domestic stability and economic survival. Children grew up quickly, learning the rhythms of work and ritual, yet finding moments of play and learning that connected them to their culture. Yet life was precarious. Famine, disease, and floods were constant threats. Death was ever present, not only in infancy and illness, but also in war and political upheaval. The city-state, as Sumerian rulers conceived it, provided protection and order, but at a cost. Labor was structured and enforced. Social hierarchies were rigid, and failure to comply with laws or rituals could mean punishment or exclusion. Even in prosperity, there was the awareness that the gods, or circumstances beyond human control, could undo everything. It is impossible to overstate the ingenuity required to maintain such a civilization. Irrigation networks stretched for miles across the flat plains, delivering life-giving water while avoiding the slow but deadly accumulation of salt in the soil. Administrative systems monitored everything from grain distribution to labor assignments to temple offerings. Scribes recorded these data meticulously on clay tablets, ensuring that knowledge survived even if individuals did not. These systems required both foresight and discipline, a testament to the cognitive leap that the Sumerians had achieved. Trade further extended their influence. Sumerian cities connected through rivers and overland routes to distant regions, exchanging grain, textiles, metals, and crafted goods. Traders carried not only commodities, but ideas, technologies, and religious concepts. Through these networks, the Sumerians contributed indirectly to the development of other civilizations, spreading techniques in writing, irrigation, law, and governance. Their impact was both immediate and enduring, a reminder that influence does not require permanence, only creativity and adaptation. But Sumer's brilliance existed alongside fragility, the very systems that enabled complex organization, rigid hierarchies, centralized authority, and dependence on irrigation, also made the civilization vulnerable. Environmental changes, invasions by outsiders, and political unrest could cascade rapidly, collapsing the social order. The fall of Ur, despite its power and sophistication, demonstrates this vulnerability. The ziggurats and temples may have been monumental, but they could not protect against human or natural forces beyond their control. Even so, the memory of Sumer endured. Subsequent civilizations, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, carried forward Sumerian innovations. Laws, literature, administrative techniques, and religious concepts persisted, often transformed, but always traceable to the earliest cities of Mesopotamia. Time softened the language and reshaped the myths, but the essence of Sumer, the struggle to organize, to understand, to survive, and to leave a legacy, remained embedded in the culture of the region. In reflecting on Sumer, we confront the duality of human achievement, the capacity for extraordinary creativity, and the inevitability of impermanence. The Sumerians built temples that reached toward the sky, invented writing to preserve knowledge, and created systems of law and administration that influenced countless generations. Yet their cities crumbled, their spoken language disappeared, and their political structures could not withstand external pressures. Civilization, as they demonstrated, is never final. It is fragile, dynamic, and continually renewed. And so, as we consider Sumer today, we see more than ruins or ancient tablets. We see the dawn of collective human effort, the first attempt to turn scattered communities into organized society, the first confrontation with mortality and the human desire for remembrance. Their legacy whispers through time, reminding us that civilization is both a gift and a responsibility. It demands creativity, cooperation, resilience, and an understanding that every innovation carries risk. The Sumerians may have lived thousands of years ago, yet their world is not lost. In the way we measure time, in the stories we tell, in the cities we build, and in the written word that preserves thought beyond the limits of life, Sumer continues. Their struggle, their genius, their fears, and their hopes resonate in every corner of modern civilization. In studying them, we do not merely look at the past, we look at ourselves, at the origins of our collective story, and at the enduring human endeavor to impose order, meaning, and beauty on a world that offers neither easily. The legacy of Sumer, immense and subtle, remains a foundation beneath all that followed. Their voices echo in clay, stone, and story, and if we listen closely, even in the quiet of the desert where their cities once thrived, we can almost hear the Sumerians themselves. The farmers tending canals, the scribes pressing symbols into wet clay, the priests chanting to gods, both terrifying and necessary, and the children laughing as the first civilization ever built stretches its fragile hands across the centuries to touch us still. Even as we reach deeper into Sumer's story, it becomes clear that their civilization was more than the sum of walls, temples, and kings. It was an experiment in human organization, a first attempt at shaping society, culture, and thought on a scale that had never existed. And like all experiments, it was messy, fragile, and full of contradictions. To wander through Sumerian history is to walk a tightrope between brilliance and fragility, between triumph and inevitable decay. The cities themselves were living entities, buzzing with activity and constantly demanding attention. Uruk, Lagash, and Eridu were not mere collections of houses. They were orchestrated systems of labor, trade, worship, and governance. Streets ran like veins, carrying life to every corner. Markets were alive with barter, negotiation, and gossip, full of voices rising and falling in the heat of midday. Fish from the rivers were brought to sell alongside barley, dates, and woven cloth, while craftsmen displayed tools, pottery, and jewelry. Each item, each transaction, was a link in the chain that held the city together. Life, however, was never easy. The sun burned relentlessly in summer, and the rivers could turn violent without warning. Floods sometimes arrived early, washing away crops and homes. At other times, the Tigris and Euphrates withheld water, leaving fields cracked and barren. Farmers and laborers bore the brunt of these forces. There lives a constant negotiation with an unpredictable environment. Their survival depended not just on skill, but on collaboration, on timing, and on the careful maintenance of canals and dikes that threaded across the plains. At the center of all this was the temple. Ziggurats towered above the mud-brick city, monumental steps to the heavens, their faces steeped in ritual and authority. Priests orchestrated both spiritual and practical life, managing land, labor, and resources, in addition to offering sacrifices and chanting prayers. Religion was inseparable from administration. When a Sumerian offered grain, it was not only devotion, it was participation in a complex system that ensured the city functioned. Festivals were not mere celebration, they reinforced hierarchy, order, and social cohesion. The gods, in a sense, were the glue that held society together. Education and literacy were prized, yet rare. Scribes, trained for years, became indispensable to city administration. Their work recording grain distributions, labor assignments, temple offerings, and contracts was both practical and powerful. Writing gave permanence to human intention, extending memory beyond life. A scribe could immortalize agreements, enforce law, and transmit knowledge across generations. Literacy was power, and the control of knowledge became the most subtle form of authority in Sumerian cities. Yet, the human stories behind these records remain vivid. A tablet might list debts or provisions, but the lives it represents were real families who woke before dawn to labor in fields, children who ran errands while learning symbols on clay slates, women weaving textiles while tending younger siblings. These lives, though repetitive and constrained, were full of ingenuity, small joys, and struggles that mirrored the complexity of the human experience. Civilization, Sumer taught, is never about monuments alone. It is about the ordinary people whose daily labor sustains it. Even in their advances, the Sumerians contended with limitations. Disease was a constant threat. Without understanding germs, they relied on herbal remedies, incantations, and ritual. Death came early and often. Life expectancy was short, and mourning was a regular rhythm of existence. Children's mortality was high, yet families persisted, finding resilience in community, shared labor, and devotion to gods who were both merciful and terrifying. Trade and interaction extended Sumer's influence far beyond the river valleys. Caravans carried goods like timber, precious stones, and metals from distant regions, while the city's knowledge and techniques spread across Mesopotamia. Sumer was both a hub and a node in a network of exchange that shaped culture, technology, and governance across the ancient world. Their systems of law, record-keeping, and administration informed neighboring civilizations and laid a foundation for empires that would rise centuries later. But with success came vulnerability, centralization, rigid hierarchies, and dependence on irrigation made the civilization fragile. Environmental shifts, soil salinization, political infighting, and external invasion all contributed to decline. The very systems that allowed Sumerians to flourish, complex governance, monumental construction, and organized labor, also amplified the consequences of failure. Collapse was not sudden, but a slow unraveling, a reminder that even the most sophisticated civilizations are contingent on both human effort and environmental stability. And yet, even as cities fell and dynasties faded, the Sumerian legacy endured. Writing persisted, myths were adapted, administrative practices continued. The gods they worshipped changed names, but their stories influenced later cultures, embedding themselves in literature, religion, and thought for millennia. Flood myths, epic tales of heroism, and legal codes carried forward, subtly shaping the world that followed. Sumer was the first mirror humanity held up to itself. It reflected both our capacity for ingenuity and our susceptibility to fragility. It taught that civilization is a delicate balance between order and chaos, freedom and obligation, innovation and tradition. It revealed that progress carries both triumph and risk, and that memory, whether recorded in clay or carried in culture, is as vital as survival itself. As we leave the plains of southern Mesopotamia, the echoes of Sumer linger. The canals may have silted, the ziggurats crumbled, and the spoken language faded. Yet the imprint of human effort remains undeniable. Sumer is more than history. It is a lens through which we can understand the origins of society, the evolution of thought, and the enduring challenge of organizing human life in the face of uncertainty. The story of Sumer, when we look closely, is not just the tale of mud brick cities and ziggurats reaching for the sky. It is the story of humanity learning to shape its own destiny, of people confronting chaos and trying again and again to impose order on a world that offers none willingly. In Sumer, the first civilization, we see both the brilliance and the fragility of organized human life. Every street, every canal, every tablet tells a story of ingenuity, labor, hope, fear, and the relentless drive to endure. Imagine the city of Uruk at its peak. Dawn breaks over the flat plains, painting the mud brick walls with soft gold. Smoke rises from hundreds of hearths as families begin their day. Children follow their parents to fields or workshops, carrying tools, clay, or baskets of grain. Farmers and laborers repair irrigation canals, mindful that a single mistake could flood crops or leave fields dry. Merchants shout across crowded markets, negotiating prices for fish, barley, textiles, or pottery. Each voice, each action, forms part of a complex symphony, a human system so sophisticated that it could only exist because thousands of individuals worked in coordination, motivated by survival, faith, and the chance to leave their mark. At the heart of the city stands the ziggurat, a monumental structure that is both temple and administrative hub. Priests manage resources, record offerings, and perform rituals, while claiming to speak for the gods who might decide the city's fortune. Religion and governance intertwine. The gods are capricious, but Through ritual, humans can attempt to influence them. Life is a negotiation with the unseen forces that govern floods, famine, and fortune. Fear, hope, and reverence intertwine to create social cohesion, a mechanism that allows thousands of strangers to cooperate under a fragile, shared order. Writing, perhaps Sumer's most revolutionary gift, emerges from necessity. The earliest tablets are filled with lists, numbers, and receipts, accounts of grain, labor, and trade. They are practical, yet they transform society profoundly. Memory becomes external. Knowledge persists beyond the individual. Scribes, few in number, but immensely powerful, become the gatekeepers of truth. Through them, the city's administration can function, trade can be tracked, and history can be preserved. Over time, writing evolves to capture poetry, myth, and philosophy, most famously the Epic of Gilgamesh, a profound meditation on mortality, friendship, and the human desire to be remembered. Through symbols pressed into clay, Sumerians reach across millennia to speak to us directly, revealing universal fears and aspirations. Yet, for all its brilliance, Sumer was vulnerable. The very systems that enabled complex civilization also magnified its fragility. Rigid hierarchies, dependence on irrigation, environmental stress, and political strife made the cities susceptible to decline. Floods could destroy, salinization could ruin crops, invaders could conquer, and they did. The rise of Akkadian, Babylonian, and later empires shows that Sumerian structures, though foundational, could be absorbed, adapted, and sometimes destroyed. Civilization, as Sumer teaches, is never guaranteed. It is always contingent, a delicate balance between ingenuity and circumstance. Despite its fall, Sumer's influence endured. Writing, mathematics, law, and religious ideas traveled with succeeding civilizations. Flood myths, epic stories of heroism and mortality, and administrative techniques informed societies for centuries. Even when the spoken language vanished, the systems, stories, and innovations continued, like a faint heartbeat beneath the soil, waiting to be rediscovered. Archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries unearthed these remnants, revealing a civilization more sophisticated and influential than previously imagined. Through tablets, ruins, and artifacts, Sumer reaches us across time, not as a myth, but as a real human experience. Reflecting on Sumer forces us to confront what civilization truly is. It is not monuments alone. It is not kings or armies. It is a web of cooperation, knowledge, ritual, labor, and belief that allows people to live together in ways impossible for isolated communities. It is both creation and compromise, innovation and limitation. The Sumerians understood the world as dangerous, chaotic, and unpredictable. Yet they built cities, systems, and symbols to persist within it. They faced mortality directly, yet sought permanence through memory, record, and legacy. The duality of Sumer, the tension between human ambition and vulnerability, continues to resonate today. Modern cities, governments, and technologies echo the same patterns: coordination, trade, law, ritual, and hierarchy. We inherit the Sumerian experiment, with all its successes and failures, continuing the work of building order and meaning in a world that remains indifferent to human life. Their triumphs inspire us. Their fragility warns us. Sumer teaches that civilization is possible, but never inevitable, and that every achievement carries risk alongside reward. Sumerians were not abstract figures. They were real people with desires, fears, and dreams. They loved, labored, worshipped, and argued. They sought permanence in memory, immortality through deeds, and order in chaos. They failed, yet their ideas survived. They lived in a world full of uncertainty, yet they created systems that allowed life, thought, and culture to flourish. Their legacy is not only the technologies or laws they developed, it is the very idea of civilization itself. That humans can cooperate, imagine, record, and endure beyond the limits of the individual. As we step back and look at the plains of southern Mesopotamia today, we see ruins, mounds, and the remains of canals. But through imagination and knowledge, we see more. We see the bustling streets of Uruk, the laborers repairing canals, the priests chanting to gods, and the scribes inscribing clay tablets. We see the complexity, resilience, and humanity of the first civilization. And we hear, faintly but unmistakably, the whispers of people who lived, struggled, and dreamed so long ago, leaving behind a blueprint for what humanity could achieve when it dares to organize, to record, and to aspire. Sumer is a mirror, reflecting the earliest ambitions of human society and the timeless questions we still face. How to live together, how to endure, how to create meaning, and how to leave a mark that survives the uncertainty of time. Its cities have crumbled, its language has faded, yet its ideas, its systems, and its lessons continue to shape us. In studying Sumer, we are not merely learning about the past. We are learning about ourselves, our civilizations, and the fragile, extraordinary endeavor of humanity, striving to leave a lasting imprint on an indifferent world. The story of Sumer ends in ruins, but begins in every civilization that followed. It is a story of humanity itself, ambitious, fragile, inventive, mortal, and eternal through memory. It is a story that continues quietly, beneath every city, in every law, in every story, and in every record of human thought. Sumer may have been the first civilization, but its legacy remains alive, echoing across 4,000 years, and reminding us that the first human dream of order and meaning was never truly lost. It was simply the seed from which all of history would grow.